A black waitress with $23 to her name just saved a dying homeless man in the rain. 3 days later, she lost her job, her apartment, and her reputation, because that homeless man was a billionaire and his family wanted her destroyed. This is the story of Natalie Liam, and it starts on a midnight street where no one else stopped. The fluorescent lights of Blue Moon Diner buzzed overhead as Natalie Liam wiped down the counter for the 100th time that night. It was 11:30 and only 2 customers remained, a drunk man slumped in the corner booth and a young couple arguing in hushed voices near the window. Natalie's feet ached. Her back screamed from 8 hours of carrying heavy plates and forcing smiles at customers who barely looked at her face. She reached into her apron pocket and counted her tips again. $23. Not enough for the electricity bill due tomorrow, but it would have to do. The drunk man in the corner raised his hand and snapped his fingers without even looking up. Natalie walked over, her worn sneakers squeaking against the linoleum floor. Another beer. He slurred, his eyes crawling up her body in a way that made her skin prickle. Kitchen's closing in 15 minutes, sir. I can get you some coffee instead. The man's face twisted. He grabbed her wrist, pulling her close enough that she could smell the alcohol on his breath. I said beer, sweetheart. Don't make this difficult. Natalie's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. Please let go of my arm, sir. From behind the counter, her manager, Rick, appeared. But instead of helping, he shot Natalie a warning look. Everything okay here, Natalie? Just get the man what he wants. She pulled her wrist free and walked to the back without another word. In the small kitchen, she leaned against the cold metal prep table and pulled out her wallet. Behind the few crumpled bills sat a photo of Rachel, her 6-year-old daughter, grinning with 2 missing front teeth. Natalie touched the image with her fingertip and whispered, 3 more hours, baby. Just 3 more hours. Her phone buzzed. The screen showed Mrs. Patterson, her elderly neighbor who watched Rachel during night shifts. Natalie, honey, I don't want you to worry, but Rachel's running a little fever. Nothing serious, she's sleeping now, but I thought you should know. Natalie's heart clenched. How high? Just 101. I gave her some children's Tylenol. She's resting fine. I'll be home as soon as I can. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. I'm so sorry for the trouble. No trouble at all, sweetheart. That little girl is an angel. You just focus on finishing your shift. Natalie hung up and pressed her palms against her eyes. Rachel was sick, and she was stuck here serving drinks to men who treated her like furniture. Her mother used to say that dignity was something no one could take from you unless you let them. But some nights, Natalie wondered if her mother had ever worked a job like this. Her mother. Gone 3 years now, taken by a heart that gave out too soon, and medical bills that would follow Natalie like a shadow for the rest of her life. $18,000 still owed to St. Mary's Hospital, the same place that had let her mother die in a hallway because the ICU was full and she didn't have the right insurance. The shift dragged on. At 12:15, Natalie finally clocked out. Rick didn't say goodbye, just reminded her that she was opening tomorrow at 10 and being late wasn't an option. Outside, the rain had turned vicious. Natalie pulled her thin jacket tighter and started walking. The last bus had left an hour ago, and a taxi would cost more than she'd made all night. Home was 40 minutes on foot if she walked fast. She was 10 minutes into her walk when she saw him. An old man lay crumpled against the base of a streetlight, half on the sidewalk, half in a puddle that reflected the orange glow above. His clothes were soaked through, dark and shapeless. From a distance, he looked like a pile of discarded rags. Natalie slowed her pace. A car rushed past, splashing water across the man's motionless form, then another. Neither stopped. She should keep walking. Rachel was waiting. Mrs. Patterson was old and needed sleep. And this man, whoever he was probably just drunk. That's what everyone assumed about people lying on sidewalks in neighborhoods like this. Just another homeless drunk sleeping it off. But something made her stop. Maybe it was the way his hand was stretched out, fingers slightly curled as if reaching for help that never came. Maybe it was the memory of her mother alone in that hospital hallway. Or maybe it was simply the fact that Natalie knew what it felt like to be invisible. She approached slowly. Sir, are you okay? No response. She knelt beside him, ignoring the cold water seeping through her jeans. Up close, she could see he was old, maybe 70 or more. His face was gaunt, his lips slightly blue. But when she pressed her fingers to his neck, she found a pulse. Weak, but there. Sir, can you hear me? His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. His mouth moved, but the only sound that came out was a thin wheeze. That's when Natalie noticed something strange. His coat was torn and dirty, the kind of thing you'd find in a donation bin. But on his wrist, catching the streetlight, was a watch. Even through the rain and grime, she could tell it wasn't cheap. The metal gleamed with a quality that didn't match anything else about him. She didn't know brands or luxury items, but she knew that watch cost more than everything she owned combined. It didn't matter. Whoever he was dying. Natalie pulled out her phone and dialed 911. The operator's voice was flat and bureaucratic. "What is your emergency?" "There's an elderly man collapsed on Morrison Street near the old warehouse. He's barely breathing. I think he had a stroke or something. Please send help." "Ma'am, we have units in the area, but response time for that zone is approximately 40 minutes. Can you confirm the patient is breathing?" 40 minutes? He might not have 40 minutes. "I understand, ma'am. We're dispatching now. Please stay on the line." Natalie looked down at the old man. His eyes had closed again, and his breathing was becoming more shallow. 40 minutes might as well be forever. She made a decision. Ending the call, she stepped into the street and planted herself directly in the path of the next approaching car. Headlights blinded her. Tires screeched. A taxi skidded to a stop 3 feet away, and the driver rolled down his window, face contorted with rage. "Are you crazy, lady? I could have killed you. Please, there's a man dying here. I need to get him to St. Mary's Hospital. I'll pay you. I have money." The driver looked past her to the figure on the ground and shook his head. "That guy, no way. He's gonna bleed or puke all over my seats. And what if he dies in my cab? I'm not getting involved." Natalie reached into her pocket and pulled out her tips. All $23, everything she had. "This is all I have. Please. I'm begging you." Something in her voice must have reached him. Or maybe it was the sight of the crumpled bills offered so desperately in the pouring rain. The driver cursed under his breath, then unlocked the back door. "Fine, but if anything happens to my car, you're paying for it." Together they managed to drag the old man into the back seat. Natalie climbed in beside him, cradling his head in her lap to keep it elevated. As the taxi lurched forward, she felt his hand move slightly, his cold fingers brushing against hers. His lips moved again, and this time she heard a word. Just one, barely a whisper. "Elise." Natalie didn't know anyone named Elise, but she held his hand tighter and leaned close to his ear. "It's okay. You're going to be okay. Just hold on. Just hold." At St. Mary's Hospital, the emergency room was harsh and bright after the darkness outside. Natalie burst through the doors, shouting for help, and within seconds nurses surrounded the old man, transferring him to a gurney. "What's his name?" a nurse demanded, already checking his vitals. "I don't know. I found him on the street. Any ID, insurance card, anything." "Nothing. He had nothing on him." The nurse exchanged a look with her colleague, a look Natalie recognized all too well. It was the look people gave when they were calculating whether someone was worth the trouble. "And you are." "I'm just the person who found him." Another look. This one directed at Natalie herself, at her wet uniform, her brown skin, her exhausted eyes. The nurse's tone shifted, becoming clipped and suspicious. "We're going to need you to fill out some paperwork, and someone will need to take responsibility for initial costs if no family comes forward." Natalie felt the walls closing in. This was exactly what she had feared. But before she could respond, a voice cut through the tension. "I'll handle the intake. Get him to Trauma 2 now." A tall black man in a white coat strode past the nurses, his expression brooking no argument. His name tag read, Dr. James Porter. He glanced at Natalie as the gurney rushed by, and for just a moment his eyes softened. "You brought him in." Natalie nodded, unable to speak. "You saved his life. Whatever happens next, remember that." Then he was gone, disappearing through the double doors with the old man. Natalie stood alone in the waiting room, soaking wet, with $3 left in her pocket and no idea what she had just gotten herself into. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and somewhere in the trauma ward, a man whose name she didn't know was fighting for his life because a waitress who had nothing had chosen to give everything. Natalie sank into a plastic chair and stared at the ceiling. Rachel was still sick. Her shift started in less than 10 hours, and she had just spent her last real money on a stranger. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, something she'd said 100 times before she died. "Natalie, if you ever walk past someone who needs help, don't expect anyone to stop for you when you fall." She had never walked past anyone, not once, and tonight was no different. But as the minutes ticked by and the fluorescent lights hummed their cold song, Natalie couldn't shake the feeling that this night was going to cost her more than money. She just didn't know how much. Natalie must have fallen asleep in that plastic chair because the next thing she knew, pale morning light was streaming through the hospital windows and her phone was buzzing insistently. She blinked disoriented and checked the screen. 9:52. Her shift started in 8 minutes. She called the diner with shaking hands. Rick answered on the second ring, his voice already laced with irritation. "Natalie, where the hell are you? I've got the Sunday brunch crowd coming in and no one on the floor." "Rick, I'm so sorry. Something happened last night. There was an emergency I had to—" "I don't want to hear it. This is the third time this month you've had some excuse. I need people I can count on. Please just give me an hour. I can be there by 11, I swear." The line went silent for a moment. When Rick spoke again, his voice was flat. "Don't bother. I'm done making exceptions. Pick up your last check on Friday." The call ended. Natalie stared at the phone in her hand, the words not fully registering. Fired. She had been fired. After 3 years of double shifts of smiling through insults of never once complaining when Rick shorted her hours or gave the good tables to younger, lighter-skinned waitresses. Gone just like that. She thought of Rachel still sick at Mrs. Patterson's. She thought of the rent due next week, the electricity bill, the $18,000 she still owed this very hospital. The walls of the waiting room seemed to press closer. But before the panic could fully take hold, she heard footsteps approaching. Dr. Porter appeared from behind the double doors, still in his scrubs, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept either. "You're still here," he said, something like surprise in his voice. Natalie stood up quickly, smoothing her wrinkled uniform. "I wanted to know if he made it. The man I brought in." Dr. Porter nodded slowly. "He's stable. It was a mild stroke combined with severe dehydration and exhaustion. Another hour out there and he wouldn't have survived." He studied her face for a moment. "You saved his life, you know. Most people would have walked by." Most people did. The doctor's expression flickered with something Natalie couldn't quite read. "There's something else. We ran his blood work. He's got stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Advanced. He's been refusing treatment for some time based on the progression." Natalie absorbed this information in silence. A dying man who didn't want to be saved. And she had saved him anyway. "Does he have any family? Anyone we should contact?" "We're working on that. He had no ID, but there was a watch." Dr. Porter hesitated. "It's a Patek Philippe, custom made, worth more than most houses in this city. The serial number is registered, so we're tracing it now. A watch worth more than a house, on a man who looked like he'd been sleeping in alleys. Nothing about this made sense." "Can I see him?" Natalie asked, not entirely sure why she wanted to. Dr. Porter considered for a moment, then nodded. "Room 312. He woke up about an hour ago. Hasn't said much, but he asked about the person who brought him in." Natalie took the elevator to the 3rd floor, her heart beating faster with each ascending number. She didn't know what she expected to find. Gratitude, maybe, or confusion. What she didn't expect was what actually happened when she pushed open the door to room 312. The old man was sitting up in bed, staring out the window at the gray morning sky. Without the rain and the darkness, she could see him more clearly now. His face was weathered but distinguished with sharp cheekbones and deep-set eyes that held a strange intensity. He looked nothing like the crumpled figure she had found on the sidewalk. He looked like someone who had once commanded rooms full of powerful people. When he heard her enter, he turned. Their eyes met, and Natalie saw something shift in his expression. Not gratitude. Something more complicated. Something almost like shame. "You're the one," he said. His voice was hoarse but steady. "The one who stopped." Natalie nodded suddenly, unsure of what to say. "Why?" The question was direct, almost demanding. "Because you needed help. Lots of people need help. Most don't get it." Natalie thought of her mother dying in a hallway of this same hospital. "My mother used to say that if you walk past someone who needs help, you can't expect anyone to stop for you when you fall." The old man's face changed. For just a moment, the hardness cracked, and Natalie glimpsed something raw underneath. His hand moved unconsciously to his chest as if pressing against an old wound. "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was. She passed 3 years ago." "I'm sorry." And the way he said it, Natalie believed he meant it. They sat in silence for a moment. Then the old man spoke again, his voice quieter now. I had a daughter once. She used to say things like that. Things about kindness, about helping strangers. His eyes drifted back to the window. She died 20 years ago. Car accident. And I've spent every day since then trying to forget that the last thing I ever said to her was spoken in anger. Natalie didn't know how to respond to that. But before she could try, the door burst open and the room was suddenly full of people. Men in expensive suits. A woman with sharp features and cold eyes. Security guards. And at the center of it all, a man in his mid-40s with graying hair and the same sharp cheekbones as the patient in the bed. The suited man's eyes swept the room and landed on Natalie with immediate suspicion. Who is this? Why is there a stranger in my father's room? Father? The word hung in the air. A younger man, slim and professional, stepped forward with a tablet in his hands. Mr. Whitmore, this is the woman who brought your father to the hospital last night. Her name is Natalie Liam. The man called Mr. Whitmore barely glanced at Natalie. His attention was fixed on the old man in the bed. Dad, what the hell happened? We've had people looking for you for 2 weeks. Do you have any idea what you've put us through? The board is in chaos. The Henderson merger is falling apart. And you're lying in some public hospital like a... Like a what, Vincent? The old man's voice cut through his son's tirade like a blade. Like a common person. Like someone who doesn't matter. Vincent Whitmore's jaw tightened. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. Harold turned his gaze to Natalie, and something softened in his expression. This woman saved my life. She had nothing to gain and everything to lose, and she saved me anyway. That's more than I can say for my own blood. The woman with cold eyes stepped forward. She was dressed impeccably, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, her manner radiating controlled fury. I'm Rebecca Whitmore, Vincent's wife, and while we're certainly grateful for any assistance rendered, I think it's best if we handle family matters privately from here. Her eyes met Natalie's and the message was clear. Leave. Natalie glanced at Harold, but before she could say anything, security was already at her elbow, gently but firmly guiding her toward the door. Wait! Harold called out, but Vincent was already speaking over him, his voice loud and commanding, and the door closed behind Natalie before she could hear what came next. She stood in the hallway, her heart pounding. Harold Whitmore. Even Natalie, who paid little attention to the news of wealthy people, recognized that name. Whitmore Holdings was one of the largest real estate developers on the East Coast. Their buildings dominated the skyline. Their name was on hospitals and university wings and charity galas. And she had just rescued the man who built it all, found him dying in the rain like he was nobody. The next 3 days were the worst of Natalie's life. It started with the reporters. Somehow word had leaked that Harold Whitmore, missing billionaire, had been found by a waitress in a bad neighborhood. The story was too good to ignore. Within 24 hours, Natalie's name was everywhere. At first, the coverage seemed positive. Hero waitress saves billionaire's life. Good Samaritan finds missing tycoon. But the tone shifted quickly. Someone had started digging into Natalie's background. Someone with resources and motivation. The first article appeared on the second day. Who is Natalie Liam, the woman behind the rescue? It mentioned her debt to St. Mary's Hospital, the $18,000 still unpaid. It mentioned that she was a single mother. It raised questions couched in careful language, but unmistakable in their implication. Was this really a coincidence? How did a waitress happen to find one of the richest men in America? What did she really want? Natalie watched the comments section fill with poison. She's obviously after money. Bet she staged the whole thing. These people always have an angle. The racial undertones were barely hidden. Some weren't hidden at all. By the third day, camera crews were camped outside her apartment building. Mrs. Patterson, bless her heart, had taken Rachel to stay with her sister to avoid the chaos. Natalie was alone, trapped in her tiny apartment, watching her life unravel on television. The knock came on the evening of the third day. Natalie opened the door to find 2 people in suits, a man and a woman, both with the polished, predatory look of expensive lawyers. Miss Liam, I'm Richard Hayes, representing the Whitmore family. May we come in? Natalie knew she should say no. She knew she should ask for her own lawyer, except she couldn't afford one. But she also knew that saying no would only make things worse. She stepped aside. The lawyer sat on her worn couch looking absurdly out of place in her cramped living room. Richard Hayes opened a leather briefcase and produced a document. Miss Liam, the Whitmore family appreciates your assistance in their time of need. However, given the media attention and the sensitive nature of Mr. Whitmore's health, they believe it would be best for all parties if you were to sign this agreement. Natalie took the document. It was dense with legal language, but the key points were clear enough. She would agree not to speak to the media, not to contact Harold Whitmore or any member of his family, and not to pursue any legal claims related to the events of that night. In exchange, she would receive $50,000. And if I don't sign, the woman lawyer who hadn't introduced herself leaned forward. Miss Liam, let me be frank. The Whitmore family has resources that you cannot imagine. If you refuse this offer, they will be forced to protect themselves through other means. Your employment history will be scrutinized. Your parenting will be questioned. Your debt to St. Mary's Hospital is technically in default, which could have legal consequences. Natalie felt the blood drain from her face. You're threatening to take my daughter. We're simply explaining the realities of the situation. $50,000 is a generous offer. It would pay off your debts, give you a fresh start. All you have to do is walk away. Natalie looked at the document in her hands. $50,000. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life. It would solve everything. The debt, the rent, Rachel's future. All she had to do was sign her name and pretend that none of this had ever happened. But something in her rebelled. Some stubborn core that her mother had planted deep inside her, a voice that said dignity wasn't for sale. I didn't do anything wrong, Natalie said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. I saw a man dying and I helped him, that's all. I'm not going to sign a paper saying I did something wrong when I didn't. Richard Hayes' expression didn't change, but the woman lawyer's eyes hardened. You're making a mistake, Miss Liam. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. After they left, Natalie sat alone in the dark, the unsigned document still on her coffee table. She thought about calling someone, but who? She had no family left. Her friends from the diner would have already heard the rumors and chosen sides. She was completely, utterly alone. The next morning, she woke to find an eviction notice taped to her door. The landlord cited lease violations, but didn't specify what they were. Natalie knew the truth. Someone had made a phone call, applied some pressure. The Whitmores were making good on their threats. She spent the day packing what little she had, trying to figure out where she and Rachel could go. A shelter, maybe. Or she could beg Mrs. Patterson to let them stay temporarily. The humiliation burned, but Rachel's safety mattered more than pride. That evening, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her swipe to accept. Miss Liam. The voice was professional, but not cold. My name is David Morrison. I'm Harold Whitmore's personal attorney, not the family's attorney, his. Natalie gripped the phone tighter. What do you want? Mr. Whitmore asked me to contact you. He's been trying to reach you for 2 days, but his family has been managing his communications. He wanted me to tell you that he knows what's being done in his name and he doesn't approve. That's nice, but it doesn't help me much, does it? No, it doesn't. Which is why Mr. Whitmore also wanted me to tell you that he's preparing to take action. He's been too sick to do much until now, but his condition has stabilized. He asked me to tell you to hold on for just a little longer. Natalie laughed bitterly. Hold on to what? I've lost my job. I'm about to lose my home, and everyone in the city thinks I'm some kind of con artist. Tell Mr. Whitmore that his gratitude is noted, but it doesn't pay the bills. There was silence on the other end. Then David Morrison spoke again, his voice quieter. Miss Liam, I've worked for Harold Whitmore for 30 years. I've never heard him speak about anyone the way he speaks about you. He said you reminded him of his daughter, the one he lost. He said saving you is the only thing that's mattered to him in 20 years. Natalie didn't know how to respond to that. Before she could try, the line went dead. 2 days later, Harold Whitmore suffered a massive heart attack. Natalie heard about it on the news like everyone else. Billionaire Harold Whitmore. Critical after second medical emergency. The reporters speculated about his will, his company, the power struggle that would follow if he died. No one mentioned the waitress who had saved him the first time. She tried to go to the hospital. She didn't know why exactly. Maybe to say goodbye to the only person in this nightmare who had treated her like a human being. But when she arrived at St. Mary's, security stopped her at the entrance. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your name is on the restricted list. We can't let you in." Natalie stood outside the hospital where her mother had died, where she had carried a stranger in from the rain, and watched the windows of the upper floors as if she might somehow catch a glimpse of what was happening inside. She stayed there for an hour, maybe more, until a security guard asked her to leave. Before she turned to go, she stopped at the information desk and asked for a piece of paper. She wrote a short letter, folded it carefully, and handed it to the receptionist. "Please," Natalie said. "If there's any way to get this to Mr. Whitmore, Harold Whitmore, it's important." The receptionist looked at the letter, then at Natalie's face. Something in her expression must have reached him because he nodded slowly. "I'll see what I can do." Natalie walked away without looking back. That night, Rachel asked her a question that shattered what remained of her heart. "Mommy, why do the people on TV say you're a bad person?" Natalie pulled her daughter close and held her tight. "Sometimes people get confused, baby. Sometimes they think they know things they don't. But you know who Mommy is, right?" Rachel nodded against her chest. "You're the person who helps people." "That's right. And no matter what anyone says, that's never going to change." But as she held her daughter in Mrs. Patterson's small living room, surrounded by boxes of their hastily packed belongings, Natalie wondered if she had made the right choice. If her pride, her stubbornness, her mother's principles were worth the price her daughter might have to pay. She thought about the $50,000 she had refused, about the life she could have given Rachel with that money, about the silence she could have bought, the peace she could have purchased. Then she thought about what her mother would say, about what Rachel would think of her someday when she was old enough to understand. And she knew that some things couldn't be bought. Not dignity, not truth, not the ability to look your daughter in the eye and tell her you did the right thing, even when the right thing cost you everything. Harold Whitmore woke in the ICU with tubes in his arms and the weight of his failures pressing down on his chest. The heart attack had nearly killed him, the doctors said. Another few minutes without intervention, and he would have been gone. But Harold knew the truth. It wasn't his heart that had given out. It was his conscience finally catching up to decades of neglect. David Morrison was waiting when Harold opened his eyes. His attorney of 30 years sat in a chair by the window looking older than Harold had ever seen him. "How long?" Harold's voice came out as a rasp. "3 days. You gave everyone quite a scare." "The Liam woman, Natalie, what's happened to her?" David's expression told Harold everything he needed to know before the words came. "Vincent and Rebecca have been thorough. She's lost her job, her apartment. The media has turned her into a villain. They offered her $50,000 to go away quietly, and she refused." Harold closed his eyes. Of course she refused. Because she was exactly who he thought she was. The kind of person his daughter Elise had been. The kind of person he had never deserved to meet. "There's more," David continued, reaching into his jacket pocket. "She tried to come see you. Security turned her away, but she left this." He handed Harold a folded piece of paper. Harold opened it with trembling fingers and read the words written in neat, careful handwriting. "Dear Mr. Whitmore, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I wanted you to know I don't regret stopping that night. No matter what happens to me, I would do it again. My mother always said that the worth of a person isn't measured by their wallet, but by their heart. I believed her then, and I believe her now. I hope you get better. You deserved to be saved. Everyone does. Natalie Liam." Harold read the letter twice, then a third time. His vision blurred and he realized he was crying. He couldn't remember the last time he had cried. Maybe at Elise's funeral. Maybe not even then. This letter. These words. They were exactly what Elise would have written. What she had tried to tell him over and over before that final argument, before the accident, before he lost her forever. "Get me a phone," Harold said, his voice cracking. "And get me out of this bed. I have work to do." The press conference was held in the hospital's main auditorium 3 days later. News crews from every major network packed the room. The story had evolved from missing billionaire found to family scandal to mysterious waitress under investigation. Everyone wanted answers. Harold entered in a wheelchair pushed by David Morrison. He looked frail but determined, his eyes sharp despite the pallor of his skin. Vincent and Rebecca stood to the side, their faces carefully arranged into expressions of concern that didn't reach their eyes. They had tried to stop this press conference, Harold knew. They had argued that he was too weak, that the family should present a united front, that airing private matters would damage the company. Harold had listened to none of it. The cameras flashed as Harold positioned himself behind a bank of microphones. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming." Harold began, his voice stronger than anyone expected. "I'm going to make this brief because I don't have much time left and I've wasted too much of it already." He looked directly into the cameras. 2 weeks ago, I disappeared. I left my family, my company, my entire life behind without explanation. I did this because I was dying and I didn't want to die surrounded by people who were waiting for my money. I wanted to die alone in peace on my own terms. The room was utterly still, but I didn't die. I collapsed on a street corner in the rain, and a woman I had never met stopped to help me. Her name is Natalie Liam. She is a waitress, a single mother, a person who had every reason to walk past me and keep going, but she didn't. She spent her last $20 on a taxi to bring me to this hospital. She stayed all night in the waiting room to make sure I survived, and she lost her job because of it. Harold's voice hardened. Since then, members of my own family have conducted a campaign to destroy this woman. They have attacked her reputation, threatened her livelihood, and tried to bribe her into silence. They did this without my knowledge or consent, and they were wrong. He turned to look at Vincent and Rebecca. His son's face had gone pale. Rebecca's mask of composure had finally cracked, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. She took a small step backward, as if trying to distance herself from the fallout she knew was coming. Natalie Liam did nothing wrong. She is not a con artist. She is not seeking money or fame. She is simply a good person who did a good thing, and she has been punished for it. I am here to set the record straight and to apologize to her publicly for what my family has done in my name. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Reporters began shouting questions, but Harold held up his hand. "I'm not finished. 20 years ago, I lost my daughter Elise in a car accident. She was 24 years old, and she was the best person I ever knew. The night she died, we had an argument. She wanted to volunteer in underserved communities instead of joining my company. I told her she was wasting her potential. I told her that helping strangers wouldn't amount to anything. Those were the last words I ever spoke to her." Harold's voice cracked, but he pressed on. "I've spent 20 years trying to prove myself right, trying to believe that money and power were what mattered, that kindness was weakness, that the only people worth caring about were the ones who could do something for you in return. Natalie Liam proved me wrong. She showed me what my daughter tried to tell me all those years ago, that the measure of a person isn't what they have, but what they're willing to give." He took a breath. "That's all I have to say. I hope Miss Liam will accept my apology, and I hope the rest of you will leave her in peace." The room erupted into chaos, but Harold was already being wheeled away, his part done. Natalie watched the press conference on the small television in Mrs. Patterson's living room. Rachel was asleep in the next room, exhausted from days of upheaval and uncertainty. Natalie sat alone, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as Harold Whitmore's words washed over her. She didn't cry. She had used up her tears over the past week, but something shifted inside her, a weight lifting that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. Someone believed her. Someone with power and influence had stood up and told the truth, not because he had to, but because it was right. The next morning, David Morrison appeared at Mrs. Patterson's door. He looked different from the voice on the phone, older and kinder than Natalie had imagined. He carried an envelope in his hands. "Mr. Whitmore asked me to deliver this personally," he said, handing it to her. Inside was a letter handwritten in a shaky but elegant script. "Dear Miss Liam," it read. "Words cannot express my gratitude for what you did, or my shame for what was done to you in return. I know you didn't help me expecting anything, which is precisely why I want to give you something. My daughter Elise always dreamed of starting a foundation to help single mothers access health care and education. I never had the courage to build it without her. But now I think I understand why. I was waiting for someone like you. Enclosed is an invitation to lead the Elise Whitmore Foundation. It's not charity. It's a job, one that I believe you are uniquely qualified for. There is also a scholarship fund for your daughter to be used at any school of her choosing whenever she is ready. You may refuse. I expect you will at first. But please know that accepting this is not about taking something from me. It's about allowing an old man to do one right thing before he dies. My daughter waited 20 years to send you to me. Please don't make her wait any longer. With deepest respect, Harold Whitmore. Natalie read the letter 3 times. Then she sat down on Mrs. Patterson's worn couch and finally let herself cry. 3 months later, Natalie stood in the offices of the Elise Whitmore Foundation, surrounded by staff members who looked to her for guidance. The foundation had already helped 200 families access medical care they couldn't otherwise afford. Rachel attended a school with art classes and music programs, and she came home every day with stories about her new friends. Natalie still lived simply. She still volunteered on weekends. She still remembered what it felt like to count pennies and pray they would be enough. That memory, she knew, was what made her good at this job. She understood the people she was trying to help because she had been one of them. Harold Whitmore passed away on a Tuesday in late spring with Vincent by his side. Father and son had spent the last weeks of Harold's life talking in ways they never had before. Vincent had cried when Harold apologized for failing him for being so consumed by grief over Elise that he had forgotten he still had a son who needed him. The reconciliation was imperfect and incomplete, as such things always are, but it was real. At the funeral, Natalie sat in the back row. She didn't belong among the wealthy mourners in the front, and she didn't want to. But as the service ended and people began to file out, Vincent Whitmore approached her. "My father asked me to give you this," he said, pressing something into her hand. It was Harold's watch, the Patek Philippe that had started everything. "He said you should have it." Vincent continued, his voice rough. "He said it was a reminder that sometimes the most valuable things in life aren't worth anything at all." Natalie looked at the watch in her palm, then back at Vincent. She saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not warmth exactly, but maybe the beginning of understanding. "Thank you," she said. That night, Natalie sat on her small balcony while Rachel slept inside. The city stretched out before her, millions of lights against the darkness, millions of lives intersecting in ways no one could predict. She thought about her mother and about Elise Whitmore, 2 women she had never met, but who had shaped the course of her life. She thought about Harold, dying alone in the rain, and about the choice she had made without thinking. A single act of kindness. That was all it had been. A moment's decision to stop instead of walk past, to reach out instead of turn away. And it had changed everything. Natalie looked at the watch one more time, then slipped it into her pocket. Somewhere in the city, someone else was falling. Someone else was waiting for a stranger to stop. She hoped someone would. If this story moved, you take a moment to share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We share stories like this every week. Stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.